In a stunning move, the White House quietly pulled the plug on financial aid to Africa last week, cutting off funds with a single executive order. No announcements, no farewell speeches, just silence. No more promises, no more support. Just a quiet exit dressed up as burden sharing and efficiency. But why now? Is this a strategic shift or a costly mistake by Trump? Let's dig deeper. Deal-making is something Donald Trump takes great pride in. However, he might have simply made a mistake in Africa that even he is unable to turn into a victory. It was a quiet getaway. There was silence. Calculated. Here, a couple bases shut down. There, several relief organizations slashed. No big exit, only the gradual breakdown of America's decades-long presence on the continent. On the surface, Trump's second-term policy in Africa is straightforward. Reduce costs, transfer risk, and let African countries bear the burden on their own. However, the reality that is playing out underneath that facade is quite different. One in which Trump is in charge and isn't retreating. He no longer has the leverage, so he's pulling out. The United States maintained a foothold in Africa and a foothold in global domination for decades. It could afford to make selected interventions. It dropped aid here, trained troops there, and stayed out of the way when things got messy. Africa has changed since then, though. The world has too. Trump also doesn't seem to understand that America still has obligations even if it chooses to walk away. It deprives America of its significance. Trump may have unintentionally diminished American dominance by attempting to reduce America's involvement in Africa. The rest of the world is defending its positions in Africa while he is focused on defending the motherland. China is constructing. Russia is playing around. Turkey is making investments. The Gulf states are solidifying as well. Additionally, America's absence becomes increasingly apparent as each new participant gains ground. As an indication of the United States' decline, not as a threat to Africa. And this is where Trump made a mistake. He believed that Africa was more in need of America than America was. It's been a while since that was the case. Africa isn't waiting for Washington to come back by the door. Things are changing. Negotiating new defense agreements. Establishing commercial routes outside of American systems. And making investments in domestic security partnerships that are independent of Western consent. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are among the nations that have publicly ignored American pressure and set their own way. They're also not turning around. Trump's plan has failed in this new global arena. He has given diplomatic real estate to America's adversaries without a fight by opting to disengage. Worse, he no longer has the authority to step in if things get out of hand. These days, even American allies on the continent are taking precautions. Ghana and China are growing closer. Kenya is constructing new Gulf corridors. With regard to BRICS, South Africa has doubled down. America is not being rejected by these actions. They are an acknowledgement that America has ceased to appear. Furthermore, using catchphrases like burden sharing won't be enough if Washington hopes to regain credibility. It will have to regain confidence. But is Trump capable of doing that? Not without difficulty. Because there are more than just financial and military costs associated with his withdrawal. It has a reputation. Africa now views the United States as an unpredictable actor rather than a strategic ally. One day absent, the next loud. And constantly weighing short-term appearances against long-term alliances. That image is hard to shake, especially when rivals are offering consistency, even if it comes with strings. So now Trump finds himself in a conundrum. He intended to decrease costs and scale back obligations. Instead, he's undermined America's position in the one region where global competition is intensifying fastest. He wanted to convey strength. Instead, he's forecast to recede. He assumed he was writing the rules. But Africa didn't stop playing. It just found new players. And while Trump is busy claiming victory from a shrinking map, Africa is redrawing the board. So the real question isn't what will Africa do without Trump. It's how Trump will recover from the strategic space he just sacrificed, without recognizing it. There is a worse situation in geopolitics than being despised, being unimportant. That is Donald Trump's silent disgrace in Africa. He anticipated shockwaves after reducing US military activities and closing drone bases with all the bluster of a man reducing casualties. Panic was what he anticipated. Rather, the continent hardly batted an eye. It's not because the dangers stopped. There is still an increase in violence. In the Sahel, militants continue to gain territory. Borders are still bleeding too. However, Trump never experienced the fear he had anticipated. No government rushed in. There was no request for an emergency summit. He didn't receive any pleading letters. There was no thankfulness in the silence. It was a lack of interest. Trump departed. Africa adapted. Retrenchment is a power maneuver in his perspective. People start chasing you once you leave the table. Africa, however, didn't pursue. It just went to the next thing that was offered. This required creating new security units, relying more heavily on local forces, or, in certain situations, yes, interacting with China, Russia, or Turkey. Trump believed that by leaving, he was gaining influence. Actually, he left the stage, and the performance went on without him. Consider Nigeria, where Agadez, one of the US's most sophisticated drone sites, was formerly located. It wasn't merely a logistical decision when the US withdrew its assets and changed the military leadership in Nigeria. It was intended as a communication. Your security crumbles without us. However, that communication was not received. The government of Niger did not plead for the base to remain. They turned their attention to the east. They welcomed Russian advisors into their country. With Ankara, they investigated military technology agreements. They started posing more challenging queries. Why did insurgency continue to flourish if American drones had been present for years? That's the awkward aspect of Trump's poor decision. Lack of outcomes indicates a lack of brand loyalty. For many years, the US conducted war exercises like African Lion, gave some technical and tactical expertise, and assisted in training African soldiers. But outcomes? The insurgencies surpassed the training on the ground. American assistance was frequently delayed, disjointed, and mired in red tape for local commanders. As a result, local armies were not hurt by Trump's withdrawal of troops. The weight of reality weighed on them. It had always been just the two of them. They simply ceased acting that way now. And that's where Trump's plan breaks down. Without ever acknowledging how little of the real load he had carried, he sought to transfer it to African states. The Pentagon might claim to have 6,000 soldiers in Africa, but they are dispersed over more than 50 countries. The majority worked as logistical officers, intelligence liaisons, or trainers. On PowerPoint, it looked amazing. It had little meaning on the battlefield. African militaries are therefore not failing in Trump's absence, as the US involvement diminishes. Their rate of failure is the same as it was while he was still there. That does not justify their difficulties. It is a critique of Washington's exaggerated sense of self-importance. Trump believed that removing soldiers would unnerve African governments. However, there was little panic in numerous capitals, including Accra, Bamako, and Luanda. Clarity was the key. It was made clear that the United States had never been a trustworthy security partner. The need for fresh arrangements was made clear. A clear understanding that African solutions must originate on the continent rather than in a distant capital whose attention fluctuates with election cycles. Here's the twist, though. Trump's withdrawal does not negate America's influence. It indicates that it lacks control. The local forces are now improvising wherever the United States used to have a firm hold. Wagner has some people working with him. Neighborhood partnerships are being formed by others. Some are merely attempting to hold out until a better offer is made. Even though it was used inconsistently, The strategic discipline that the US formerly enforced is vanishing. And that mayhem. It will arrive, but it won't knock on Trump's door just yet. The problem with security vacuums is that they don't remain empty. Trump believed that by retreating, he was preserving face. Rather, he is witnessing the disintegration of his power. Through silent irrelevance, not confrontation, Africa did not have to rise up. All it had to do was quit awaiting American consent. The map is currently changing, not in a big way, not in a violent way, but gradually, not in Trump's favor either. And that brings us to a more difficult reality. Who can set the conditions now that Trump can't? Trump left the table, anticipating that the game would end. Here's the twist though. The table remained upright. It simply grew larger. Additionally, new players have emerged. Various currencies, distinct regulations. Previously viewed as the prize, Africa is now learning how to deal the cards. Washington didn't anticipate that aspect. Because Russia is indeed circling. China is constructing indeed. However, another thing is also taking place. African states are no longer merely siding with one of the world's superpowers. With them, they are negotiating. Putting them to the test. Rewriting contracts with one hand, while signing transactions with the other. It's not chaos, either. It's a tactic. The continent was not left in a state of uncertainty by Trump's leaving. Its political learning curve was expedited. In Burkina Faso, for example, the government did not fall apart once the United States and France lost influence. It became consolidated. Ibrahim Traore's military command did more than simply expel foreign troops. Bilateral collaboration according to its conditions took their place. Although they were not worshipped, Russian advisors were accepted. Local businesses were given priority. The Alliance of Sahel States, AES, is one example of an African alliance. They are statements of autonomy rather than Eastern proxies or Western puppets. What's happening on the map is this. Ethiopia's leadership refuses to cede control of its internal security while flirting with Chinese funding. In Senegal, growing Gulf-funded economic zones coexist alongside democratic institutions supported by the West. Being a member of BRICS does not imply ideological allegiance in South Africa. It is a sign of bargaining power. This is the new diplomacy of Africa. Leverage from non-alignment. Africa was supposed to pick an east or west side. They were surprised when Africa began to write its own rules. Trump's absence therefore turns into a liability, not for Africa, but for Trump personally. He has taken away America's alternatives by taking away its influence. The continent continues to negotiate. It simply no longer requests permission. Furthermore, there isn't pandemonium occupying the area. It's self-assurance. That assurance isn't constant. At times, it is encased in authoritarianism. It may accompany extreme changes, coups, or populism. But it has a true foundation. A new generation of civil actors and African leaders who no longer view Washington as the focal point. This goes beyond foreign outposts and military alliances. It concerns who has the authority to define the story. Talking points were formally set by American embassies. The conversation is now shaped by local Pan-African media, online influencers, and regional broadcasters. Young people in Africa don't wait for CNN to tell them what's important. They perceive the world through encrypted chats, WhatsApp threads, and anti-imperialist slogans blaring in the streets. And that is more important than most DC policymakers comprehend. Trump didn't simply lose territory when he withdrew. He became untrustworthy. Credibility is also currency in the new Africa. Whoever turns up without arrogance, not who has the most missiles or the most GDP, who hears, who adjusts, who doesn't take responsibility for the future of Africa. China discovered that early on. Now, Russia is learning. What Turkey and even India are increasingly sophisticatedly testing. They arrive as possibilities rather than as saviors. Trump has plans for his departure. Furthermore, Africa interprets his disengagement as surrender, even though he presents it as power. Not of authority, but of importance. The kicker is this: Africa is becoming less reliant on all of them, even as more players join the pitch. Innovation in digital technology, trading within a continent, new money, pacts for Pan-African security. These are no longer fantasies. These frameworks are being tested, modified, and occasionally put into use. What about Trump? He is observing all of this from a distance. He is still certain that the game is rigged to his advantage. I was unaware that the board had changed. The guidelines have changed. Furthermore, he no longer even has a seat. Therefore, who will rule Africa is not the question at hand. The question is how long it will be before Africa dominates the discourse, and what will happen when it does. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. Even Trump's top strategists must be asking themselves, is it still possible to get back in by this point? Or has Africa permanently altered the locks? African leaders' silence says more than words can express. Anger-based condemnations are absent. No vehement press conferences demanding the participation of the United States. Western experts continue to misinterpret that part. America's withdrawal is not being protested by Africa. It's just completely replacing the necessity for America. This is Trump's strategy's last subtle jab. He didn't simply abandon the collaboration. He became himself interchangeable. There was a period when the United States had something that no one else had: military supremacy, funds for development, worldwide media influence. However, such benefits are beginning to seem archaic, even awkward, given the space Trump has left behind. Infrastructure in China is developing more quickly. There are fewer questions with Russia's backing. Packages from the Gulf, Turkey, and India are quick and adaptable. Even regional African blocs are experimenting with new diplomatic options, security measures, and funding sources. America, in the meantime, it continues to sell outdated slogans from a vacant seat. Let's honestly be tough. The majority of African leaders no longer trust Washington to be reliable. Throughout all administrations, not just under Trump, Biden made an effort to patch the holes. However, the continent witnessed the ease with which gains might be undone. What good is a partnership if every pledge, investment, and commitment can be revoked in the following election? This mistrust has been heightened to an extreme by Trump. African nations are increasingly coming to a more profound realization. You don't bargain with a superpower that can abandon you at any time. You create your alternatives. We are currently witnessing that. Africa First architecture, not anti-American sentiment. The AES Group is separately planning its military policy in West Africa. Cross-border infrastructure is being constructed in East Africa without the use of any Western blueprints. States in Southern Africa are beginning rare earth transactions without following Western extraction methods. Additionally, the Mediterranean conversation in the north is taking place more with Europe than with Washington. To put it briefly, Trump is no longer a top focus, and Africa is diversifying. This isn't retaliation, it's grounded in reality. Even nations like Ghana and Kenya, which were once strongly allied with the United States, are no longer inquiring about how to mend the previous connection. They want to know if it is worth mending at all. It's not a moral dilemma, it is a calculated move. Africa is acutely aware of how expendable it was in the eyes of the United States due to Trump's foreign policy approach. Africa is now merely doing the same. The irony that history will remember is this: Trump's door did not close. Trump shut it up about himself. He thought that America would appear powerful if it disengaged. That if he left, the continent would have to beg him. Rather, he found that the world no longer functions in that manner. absence is no longer a factor in global power. Relevance is key, and in a room you left behind, you can't be relevant. But will Trump be back? Could the United States restore what had been lost? Yes, in theory. However, things are now different. America would have to do something as never done well in order to re-enter. Lecture listen. Don't be selective, be consistent. Encourage without exerting control. Above all, stay. Not only when it suits you, it's another matter entirely if Trump or any other government can accomplish that. However, one thing is certain for the time being. Africa has progressed. The United States no longer undervalued or ignored this continent. It is younger, sharper, more cohesive, more conscious of its value, and far less understanding of partners who swing in and out with every election mood fluctuation. Therefore, the cost will be high if Trump ever wants to return. The requirements will be rigorous. What about the invitation? It won't happen on its own. Because of the table he once left behind, a new one has already been constructed in Africa. Additionally, a seat with an American flag is not required this time. Is this the only reasonable way to respond to Trump, in your opinion? Will it be regretted by the US? Should the US be permitted to return to Africa? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.